to members and staff, and we've got a couple of one councillor and one commissioner that we've invited to the table. So Kat McMillan and Shad Robertson, you're both welcome, but unfortunately, because it's a small committee, we've made a decision that it's only the commissioners and the councillors who are on the committee that will have speaking rights at this meeting. We normally, if we're at normal council meetings, we would invite you to speak, but have speaking rights. So can I, before we start, remind you, members and staff, that this meeting has been live streamed and recorded, and that the recording will be made available on the Bay Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting. I must also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during the meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. I now formally open this joint committee meeting, and in doing so, just health and safety. We've got a few new people that I haven't met before here. So if there is an event that we have to evacuate, we're meeting just out the front door and across the road is the meeting point, and the toilets are up here, just out and to the right. Drop cover holds the normal thing, so that's that. Can I ask you all to turn your phones either off or to silent, and remind those who are presenting or speaking that they must use their mics, because one, we have some on live on Zoom and also for the live streaming. So when you press your button, it'll go green, and that'll give you the ability to speak into the microphone. We have no apologies, we have no public forum, and we have no items that are not on the agenda. There's no change to the order of business, and I call for declarations of conflicts of interest. Are there any? There have been none. Public excluded business to be transferred to the open, there's none. The minutes of the previous meeting, which is page 9 of the agenda, so that was on the 28th of February. Will someone move that they're true and correct record? Commissioner, thank you. Seconded. Another commissioner, Anne, thank you. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Is there any items that need matters arising? I see there's no, when I read through the minutes, there's no points that what demanded follow-up that we have to check on. But Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just noticed that there was a healthy discussion around the Cameron Road bus shelter options, and I wonder if the members' expression of interest could be touched upon when we deal with that item with the public excluded, please.
What are you saying?
Sounds like, looks like. So there was a presentation from Mark Basang. There was some comments made by those present, and I would like to be able to reference those when we have the discussion in the confidential public excluded section, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's fine. Cool. Yep, no problem at all. All right. Moved and seconded that. We're moving on. The first presentation is TSP refresh program. So Sean, he's online, coming on. Here he is. Welcome, Sean, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. My name's Sean Jones. I'm the PSP Program Manager. I think I've probably met most of the people in the room. I've got Craig Richards here, who's our technical support. We're going to run you through the current state of the refresh to the TSOF, which is the Transport System Operating Framework. Some of you will have heard the update that we presented at Smart Growth, and we're on a journey towards informing the RLTP and the LTPs for the councils. So it's timely that we run this through with you. We've just passed a key milestone. So yeah, that's the purpose of the session. So we can move to the next slide. Do I control this or somebody else? Next slide. So we're going to run through the TSP. We're going to run over the overview of the TSP, our prioritised program, the key messaging, and some dependencies. So next slide. I think it's not. I'm not going to run through all the words here. They're available in the pack. But our vision really is connecting our communities with sustainable, safe, and smart journeys. And really, that encapsulates the vision of TSP and what we're trying to achieve through the investments that we're making. Next slide. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my Zoom thing. So, okay, yeah. So it's a collaborative partnership. Essentially, all of the organisations you see there on the screen work together in collaboration to develop the program, and each partner, particularly Wakatākei, TCC, Western Bay, and Regional Council, deliver either the infrastructure or the services that produce the transport network that we have in the Western Bay. Next slide. This shows how the TSP fits with the strategic context of the Western Bay. So at the top there, we've got Smart Growth, sets the vision. Then out of that, you've got the UFT, Urban Form and Transport Initiative. Everyone will know what that is. From there, there's two key activities. There's the Smart Growth strategy, which is happening at the moment, and TSP. TSP is essentially the transport network that delivers the UFT outcomes. Next slide. So this is what we're presenting about today is version 2. So TSP is not new. It's been around for a few years, but there has been some key pressures that are causing change. So there's been some policy around emissions and VKT. There's issues around constrained growth-enabled land supply, and this is causing housing affordability issues. Construction inflation is causing affordability of projects to go down. Funding availability is constrained, and a number of our projects have benefited from definition in the business case phase, but this means that scope has changed and costs have increased. So these pressures essentially have to be brought into how the program looks at the end. So next slide. I'm happy to take questions as we go as well, so feel free to just interrupt me as I go. So refreshed program. Next slide. So again, I've mentioned that this refresh is not a refresh. It's not a rewrite. It's a refresh. So we're taking the version 1 and we're making it. We're adjusting it and reprioritizing to make it fit for purpose. So it builds on the original TSP program. We're looking for a program that's affordable and achievable and fundable. So these are some of our fundamental objectives around how we've built up the program. So next slide. I'll hand over to Craig now. He's going to walk you through how we've developed the program and what those outcomes look like.
Thanks, Sean. Morena, everyone. Thanks for having us. Yeah, like Sean said, I'll just have a few slides here on the process and the draft program that we've come up with. In essence, without boring you with too much detail on the process, we have a working group that's worked on this over the last 4 or 5 months, I think, including myself and Sean, but also members of BOPRC, TCC, Western Bay, and Waka Kotahi. Step through a process of sort of identifying where we are at the moment and gaps that are sort of preventing us from achieving our objectives, reviewing those and coming up with options to help us address those gaps. Some quantitative analysis around transport modelling, costing, some GIS type mapping, some benefits realisation, so sort of setting our KPIs and our outcomes to achieve those, and then coming up with a draft program at the end of that can then inform the LTP and RLTP. What I would say is it's been a really collaborative approach, so that the teams and agencies I mentioned before really work together really well. I think over the last few months, as well as the working group, we've had steering group and lots of just interaction with council staff and Waka Kotahi and stuff, and lots of good inputs to help to sort of build a program that everyone's got confidence with at the end of the day. If we go to the next slide, just touch on our objectives. These were set at the sort of start of the process, building on where we see our gaps. Our objectives help us overcome those. They are around accessibility, which includes access to jobs and sport and recreation, etc., but also access to important economic centres, the port for freight, etc., but also a resilience piece in there. We know the recent events in New Zealand have put a bit more of a spotlight on resilience, and we include that in our sort of access objective to make sure our network stays resilient in the event of climate change or as climate change occurs. Safety is pretty obvious. Sustainable urban growth is about how we grow and growing in the right ways so that the impacts of our growth on, particularly in transport, in terms of emissions and safety and all that other sort of community wellbeing outcomes are as best as we can. And emissions from transport, obviously a hot topic at the moment, excuse the pun, but obviously New Zealand emission reduction plan, we need to show how we contribute to the outcomes under the emissions reduction plan. Part of that's around vehicles and technology, and part of it's around mode shift. But also an important part of that emissions is also around health and wellbeing. We know that transport emissions do cause harm in terms of respiratory disease, etc. So trying to reduce the impact of that as well. If we go to the next slide. So in terms of the program or draft program that we're up to, as Sean mentioned, we've reached a bit of a milestone of coming up with a draft program. We're now working with the council teams around just reviewing that further around for affordability and finance. But at the moment, it's about 200 million per annum in expenditure in the program over the next 30 years. Supports our growth aspirations and those key sort of growth areas defined by smart growth, but also the other objectives I mentioned around mode shift and sustainability. Emission reduction and VKT reduction. VKT's a bit of a buzzword at the moment from government. You'll know there's a directive to develop VKT reduction plans to reduce vehicle kilometres travelled in our top 5 urban centres in New Zealand. So that falls under the TSP umbrella as well, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. If you go to the next slide. The current project priorities. So within that program that I mentioned, some of the key projects, you'll all be aware of all of these. PT services, Cameron Road, the connecting the Mount spatial plan work in the Hewletts Road area, Tauranga work, 15th Ave, Te Tumu growth areas, and Omokara, TNL, the road pricing strategy. So it's not all just sort of infrastructure stuff. There's road pricing and some other studies around behaviour change and demand management to support our objectives as well. Supporting those spatial plan work that TCC's been doing, and the accessible streets, the cycleways components, all of those projects listed there deliver benefits for PT users as well as other multimodal and priority modes on our networks. We slip to the next slide. The PT network that we're working with is informed by the public transport reference case that BOPRC developed, and really showing those high frequency routes connecting up our centres and our growth areas, providing people with real alternatives in terms of public transport accessibility between key sort of origins and destinations. Next slide. Yeah, so the messages from all of that, it is a high quality model. It's as Sean mentioned, we following a process that we followed in 2020 at the time when we first did the TSP, that led to about 95% of projects being funded through the NLTF, which was a good outcome, and an outcome we strive to achieve in terms of, we do all this planning, but really unless we get funding for them, nothing's going to actually get delivered. So that's a key component. It is a robust process and a collaborative process, as I mentioned, getting everybody involved and getting everybody's input to develop a program that we're all comfortable with at the end of the day is really important. The VKT aspect, as I say, is a bit of a work in progress. Working with Waku Kotahi and the councils around the next steps for that would be to look again at the program and say which one of these projects would do the most in terms of VKT reduction if we were to develop a VKT specific program, which is what Waku Kotahi has asked us for. And I think Sean will talk a bit more about that for the next couple of slides.
Chairman, could I raise some matters at
Yes,
this juncture?
take questions.
Three things. One, in terms of sustainable urban growth, are there specific performance measures?
Within the TSP, there's, I guess, within our KPIs, we're looking at, mode share as a key one, emissions, and accessibility to those areas. So we're not sort of drilling down into each of those areas in detail, but I guess we are looking at, do they provide a range of land uses for people to enable sort of short trips and trips by active modes and public transport. But the TSP is more holistic, I guess, over top of that. The key ones would be mode share and emissions and safety.
I think just to add to that, there's also work that the TSP has been doing with the smart growth strategy. So there's in my thinking about this, we've got a number of growth areas, and we've got two parts to the transport network. You've got what you do inside the growth area, and you've got how you connect it. So the smart growth strategy work we're doing is helping support the development of what happens inside those growth areas as much as it is about what we build to connect the growth areas together. And priority is this mode shift, and so that flows through into our benefits realisation and KPIs around how we measure and track performance of our investment over time.
Okay, our second question, in terms of your wiring diagram, where does the Western Bay of Plenty Infrastructure Forum and the Northern Infrastructure Forum fit?
I haven't heard of the forums, so they're not part of TSP, although Western Bay of Plenty's scope extends for the TSP extends through into Omokara. So any infrastructure provisions to support Omokara and out into Te Puke and the Eastern Town area is part of TSP.
No, sorry. Recently there was a meeting between the Western Bay of Plenty Infrastructure Forum, which our revered colleague was at, and they've come up with a 10-point action plan. The Minister for Finance was invited, but that works quite closely also with the Northern Infrastructure Forum, which is chaired by Simon Bridges. So clearly there needs to be, I'm presuming, some connection here.
Sorry, when you said Western Bay of Plenty Infrastructure, I was thinking this was a forum inside Western Bay of Plenty District Council for some reason. So now I know what you're talking about. That forum is specifically non-public sector organisations that support the economic growth of the sub-region, and they advocate for the same outcomes that TSP heading towards. We're aligned in terms of the outcomes that we're after. It's a different avenue for that those priorities to be articulated.
Thank you. And just thirdly, I note that there's nothing in terms of access around equitable access, because actually PT is also all about providing those that aren't as fortunate as others to have an equitable access to transport solutions. So I just wondered where that sits.
Yeah, it is part of our accessibility objective. We've got, and we note there mobility impaired people, but I agree that it probably expands more than just mobility impaired people to other impairments. But I agree it's really important that we're providing for all ages and abilities. It is in there, not necessarily specifically in the words, but certainly saying that's really important. Yeah.
I do like that though. I think we should reflect on that, Craig, and maybe that could be incorporated into our access investment objective, because it is something we've in the word, and it'd be good to have it as explicit.
Chairman Tolley, Chair Councillor, Commissioner.
Anne, actually.
Anne.
Can I just ask, I'm just wanting to make sure, did I hear that you're saying that the top priority for TSP was mode shift? Because there's a lot more about TSP than mode shift. Surely there's New Zealand's biggest port, and
we've got the 4 objectives, and they're fairly evenly balanced in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So mode shift, safety is equally as important, but more important if people are getting harmed and killed on our roads. We want to address that, and as you say, access to supports and economic opportunities and the sustainable urban growth. We don't have one overarching objective.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
The issue that I've seen so far myself is that you've got a very ambitious 30-year plan, 200 million a year, 4 billion over the period of the investment, and at the moment, you did say uncommitted investment, 4 billion, and that's the big roadblock we have. If we're going to have sustainable growth nodes, we have to make sure we can get the roading infrastructure right to allow this city to function effectively. At the moment, that just isn't happening. So have you looked at that, and have you found a methodology to actually address that issue?
I think there's 2 parts to the large funding gap, and one part of it, which is a normal part of funding cycles, is that a chunk of that is actually outside the 10-year period, so it will remain unfunded. So the question is, within the 10-year period, how do we ensure that the program required to deliver the outcomes that we're after is able to get funded? And part of our methodology is around the partnership and having a single voice, consensus around the program that we've developed and the objectives and the outcomes that we're after, and that includes Wakatahi, so that when we put our bid forward, then it's going with the recognition of a consensus sitting behind it. It's one of the strategies, and then there's other strategies in place around particular projects and advocating for those independently. They've got their own independent avenues for seeking that funding.
Yeah, and we know more and more, there's potential for, I guess, non-traditional funding approaches. So we know the NLTF is a traditional funding approach, and through that LTP and RLTP would be trying to get funding for that. But more and more we're seeing the government come out with the likes of the Climate Emergency Response Fund, the SURF Fund, putting money into transport projects that align with that emissions reduction plan. So part of it's about having a plan, so when the opportunities do arise for funding, non-traditional funding, that we have the plan to apply for that.
And because we were successful with IFF, 175 million of that could be expanded in the future as well, in the mix.
Okay, is there any further?
There's we do have a couple of additional slides here which I can run through quickly. I think if we've got time, we've got another few more minutes.
We can do that.
Okay. So I just wanted to talk through two key dependencies. So if we go to the next slide, we've got the VKT reduction program and the smart growth strategy. So VKT reduction program, this graph, essentially the orange is historical VKT numbers, blue is the forecasted VKT without particular focus on trying to reduce your VKT, and the grey line is essentially what the target would need to look like in order to maintain current VKT levels even as the city grows. So this just describes the objective of the VKT reduction program. It's to, as it says on the right there, to quantify the activities and costs necessary to achieve the reduction target, and it will consider things like the current program, how land use could support it, what are the barriers, and that's a very important aspect to this. What are the barriers and what is the cost? And looking at early wins, sequencing and timing. So I think we'll keep next slide. What we know, so the alternative UFTI scenarios have a similar increased VKT and emission impact. So that was tested during the development of UFTI. So land use, settlement patterns don't fundamentally alter the VKT predictions. And interestingly, working from home has a very limited impact on VKT, which is something that's also being considered in depth. And then there's a big uplift required mode shift if you were to get it. We think it's something like bus kilometres travel, increasing bus kilometres travel from baseline of 1.3 to 15% to achieve these targets. But there might be limited impact on projected emissions. So these are just very early. If we go to the next slide, it talks more about what we're going to be doing, what the program looks like. So we had an ELI, it's closed, and work is commencing in June. Waka Kotahi is funding this work. It's going to test different scenarios. We're going to be working with the PT Services and Infrastructure team. We've actually had a meeting last week with them. So we're all joined up on it, and it's going to be delivered through the TSP partnership. In addition to what's said there, we've also got we've got a working group, which is going to be an extension of the one that's developed the program we just went through. It's going to focus on a number of work streams, and those are currently we're just working through a partnership agreement with Waka Kotahi. So that work is also starting to gather a little bit of steam. So that's the VKT program. We're still working out, because the timing of this and the timing of the RLTP don't line up. So we're still working through exactly how those two loops work, how much we can inform the RLTP through the VKT reduction work, but that'll become clear over the next 2 months probably. So that's a VKT.
Yeah, so Sean, have I picked this up correctly, that we ain't going to do too well on VKT, irrespective of all of this work, and despite that really heavy increase in mode shift, we're not going to meet our emissions targets? Did I get that right?
There's
But he also said that.
Yeah.
He also said that even with that uplift in mode shift, we're not going to meet the emissions targets, which is the real target.
Yeah.
So it's bad news and bad news.
And I can mention a bit about, we've done some work on this. The VKT has an impact on emissions from work that we've done with TCC. It does reduce emissions, but if you pull all of the VKT levers, what we know is it doesn't reduce emissions to the sort of net zero type approach. So, and there is, outside of the VKT reduction program, there still needs to be work around, electric vehicles and hydrogen and all the technology, electric buses and stuff that is ongoing. In addition to the VKT, where I think what we're saying is VKT reductions alone don't achieve the emissions outcome that we hope to achieve.
Especially in a growing city, that makes it incredibly difficult if that's your measure. Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. It's a vexing problem. And I mean, my question to you is, you're just about to go into a piece of work that will look at pathways for VKT reduction. Can you give us some sort of insight as to what they might be? Because for the life of me, we've put our best foot forward with TSP now. What is out there that we don't know that would suddenly achieve a step change? Because that's the sort of order of change that's required. I'm beyond pricing, which I know can make a significant contribution, but nowhere near 20%. I cannot see anything on the horizon.
Yeah,
What's
so
the plan?
The plan with developing the program is to, first of all, understand what the gap is. So we need to quantify that. Once we've quantified the gap, then we'll be looking at a long list of options, and that's where we'll workshop and look through a number of scenarios. We have given some thought to this, but I think as those long list options become clear, we'll start to understand what they might be. For example, what happens if you unconstrain all of the key public transport corridors and provide full PT running services with no constraint on how much it costs you to build it? So, and how much would that shift the dial on VKT? We don't really know that at the moment. So one of the scenarios we're going to be looking at is a scenario like that. It's going to be very, very expensive, but it tells you the upper limit of what's feasible. So that at the moment, some of the understanding of the numbers is a little bit constrained. So we want to unconstrain it, at least to see how far you can pull the dial. Is there what do you want to add there, Craig?
Excuse me, Craig.
More than mine.
Just before you speak, can you pull the microphone closer to you? We're getting distortion with your voice on the.
Sorry, I was just going to say pricing will definitely be part of it as well. The recent studies that have been done will be informing this in terms of road pricing and parking pricing and things like that. It's definitely has to be part of the picture here. Yeah, it is going to be a challenge. Yeah,
we started when I first came in to the regional council. We had I think it was 0.3 of mode shift, and we're up to 1.3 20 years later. To get, we have an ambitious target of getting to 20%, but that was always seen as a huge stretch target, and nobody has shown me yet how we can possibly get there. And so that's what we're looking for, is some ray of light that will encourage us to get there, because unless we do, all our projections go out the window. Commissioner.
So first of all the high growth metros are objecting or talking to government about the VKT, because the graph shows how far apart we are and how difficult it becomes, because you're simply growing, so you've got more people, and it becomes an impossible task. But the critical thing is that we could spend, and are obviously spending a lot of money looking and trying to find ways to achieve that. But that's not actually what we should be focused on, and it's not going to deliver emission reduction, which is actually the key target. So that's my concern, and that's a concern that's being expressed to government by the metros in particular, as a group, because we should be focused on how we reduce emissions. That should be our key focus. And it worries me that we're doing these sort of highly, I don't know, desktop exercises looking at what if we haven't got unlimited money to create untrammeled bus routes. We're never going to have that sort of money. So it's an exercise in futility, and we're spending a lot of money on that when we should be focused on how we're going to reduce emissions. But however,
and
so be it.
I think
as long as we don't have to find it in our budget.
Yeah, but I think you've raised a very good point. We've got a problem that all metros seem to have, and it seems stupid for us to have a separate study looking at this. It should be a combined, this is where central government can play a really important part and come to the table and for them to fund a study that will help us all, rather than each reinventing the wheel on a region or city by city basis. Brendan.
It's a question for Sean. I just want to clarify. The VKT study is being done to try and ascertain where the gap is, so that then the government are aware of where the funding gap is. So it's it's a project being done by each city so that it can identify, to move to that VKT outcome, what's the gap between what councils can afford, what's needed to be provided, and that gives the government some semblance of what's the quantum of cost nationally, which is why we're part of the study. It's a way for us to try and sort of put in front of central government, this is the cost to actually achieve those targets. Does that clarify a little bit?
That was well articulated. Thank you, Brendan. Probably much better than I did in my attempt to do it. But what Brendan said.
Yes, you want to?
Yeah, if that's all right. Just to clarify on the point around national programs, so the national VKT reduction plan will be out in August, and that will include a lot of the national view on how this can be achieved and the feasibility and the viability of some of the tools in the toolbox. What the regional VKT reduction plans then do is take it to our local context and say, for our tier 1 area, this is how we would apply that. But there is work through that toolbox that'll be the national VKT plan, which will give a number of inputs into that and give the overview.
Thank you.
I'd be interested to know how this committee, or how we can engage with the commissioners and politicians on as this thing develops, so that everybody understands how the program evolved to where it will inevitably get to by the end of the year or early next year. So I don't need an answer, but I'm thinking about that. I'd be interested on feedback. So if we go to the last slide.
Yep. Time's running out on us.
Oh, yep. Sorry. Smart growth strategy, basically telling you we are lined up with the smart growth strategy. We're preparing the transport section, and we've been attending the working group meetings where there's been a critical overlap. So that's the end of what I've got to say.
Thank you. Any last comments by any Commissioner?
That last point is absolutely critical, because as we develop that smart growth spatial plan to feed into the regional spatial planning for the RMA, transport is an absolutely key part, and so we've got to get that right. And that's transport. It's not just public transport, but it's all transport feeding into that, so that we do get sustainable urban growth from TCC's point of view, anyway.
If that's all, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Craig, for your presentation. A bit of food for thought there. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Do we have to receive? Move to receive. No. So we move on to a verbal update on supporting infrastructure passenger transport. So this is Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll be very quick. In terms of the two issues in front of you, I'll deal with the Willow Street buses, and Ollie will have a talk about the on-demand trial update. Just in brief, the Willow Street buses, our transport network has layovers in town, and that means our buses park in the middle of town. So what we're doing is to have a look at the future of that. So our long-term future is our network will change to a through route. And there'll be no longer a need to have buses laying over in town in any sort of great quantity. So that is the long-term plan. I guess the comments from the last meeting were around, well, what's the transition? There's work to be done on Willow Street and other things like that. And we're going to need to work with our Tauranga City Council cousins on where we can put and store these buses. There is a significant, for us, operational cost in moving the whole lot in one go. So we just need to work that through. There are spaces available, but nowhere near the amount of buses that are parking there right now. So we're going to need to work that through. So that's really the update. We're going to need to come back to the meeting and next time and give you a bit more sort of a fulsome piece of information.
Commissioner Colley.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I raised it because I know that we're looking to start our work in July, August, and I don't want us to get into where we were with the CBD bus, where the timelines, we had a considerable difference in timelines.
Can you bring your mic closer?
Sorry. So it's good that you're starting to do some thinking about it. But I did make the point that the original discussions that we had when we talked about that temporary CBD site was that those buses, offline buses, would be at Sulphur Point. That was the agreement. So I think the reason I raised it was we've got a lot of buses parking there. We're short of car parking in the CBD, and each bus takes three car parks. So that's a lot of car parks that are out of our CBD that we hadn't realised were going to be taken out. I realise it creates problems with your system, but we have to deal with it, and we've got to deal with it in a way that CBD land is hellishly expensive. So it's got to be dealt with in a way that is cost effective.
I can assure you, Commissioner, that in my weekly talks with our transport team, they are well aware of the issue, and they recognise that we have to, through this through stop, and they are working as fast as they can to free up, understanding the parking issues that they're creating, as well as the redevelopment of the Willow Street area. So staff at our council certainly have your concerns well on the radar.
Appreciate it.
Continue.
Yeah, so a brief update on demand. So I think, as most of you know, on-demand public transport is normally operated by smaller vehicles. They don't run to a fixed timetable. Customers can order them either through a phone app or a contact centre, and then the bus will, through some very clever technology, join everyone's request together and operate a service. It's not a door-to-door service. It's generally referred to as a corner-to-corner service. And staff at the Regional Council have been exploring for some time the opportunity of bringing a trial to Tauranga. Staff have developed what we believe is a plan for a deliverable trial in Tauranga South, so covering Pies Pa, Greerton to Tauranga Hospital. And we are taking that proposal to the Regional Council annual plan deliberations, which are taking place Thursday this week. So we'll be able to update the next meeting of this committee with the outcome of those deliberations.
Any questions? All straightforward. Well done. With that, you're finished, Mike? Thank you. We move on to the Tauranga City B-Card Initiative. Invitation to corporates. Page 15 on the agenda.
Kia ora. There's not much to say about the report, but I did hear you speak earlier about wanting a light at the end of the tunnel and how do we get mode shift, and so this proposal does speak to that in some way. We've seen some good successes at TCC with our initiative and just aiming to amplify those positive results.
Thank you. I think it is a really exciting opportunity to get the corporates involved. So just so I understand clearly, as far as, so your staff have had very good uptake on receiving a B card with a $50.
Correct.
And who's funding that? Just explain to me the funding mechanism.
It is funded through rates, and we've had 50% of staff sign up within the first 2 months. It's still early data, but we've had really positive uptake as far as the staff who have received their cards are using them frequently, and we're working to also estimate how many avoided emissions we've created through the initiative.
Is this a combined regional council, Tauranga City, and I'm talking about the B card funding?
That's from TCC.
From TCC. So, but that's what I wanted clarification of.
Sorry, I will just clarify. Regional Council contributed to the first upload of the money on the card, so it was jointly funded through Regional Council and TCC. Yeah.
But so to expand on this initiative, and I think it's fantastic, we need corporates to get involved, and we probably need to do a partnership with corporates, I would have thought, where we're helping them to get the thing up and running at least, because there's incentives for corporates through reduced parking cost for their staff anyway, but we need to develop a program, so it becomes more formalised, that they know what it is a genuine partnership. And Mike, you going to talk to that?
Yeah, look, just in terms of regional council position and some of the questions a bit earlier is, we saw this trial as an opportunity to sort of test this. We do have a travel and demand management kind of wider regional program, which we look to initiate. This is an opportunity to go with Tauranga City Council on the model here. It's a good way for us to test that model and understand its sort of success. So this is a trial for us. And it's something that we'd be looking to roll out across the region and offer it to our other council cousins and whatnot. So, but I guess what we will need to do is just to take a step, have a look at those numbers, understand the implications across the region and the council. But in principle, we're very supportive. It is an absolute alignment with our TDM sort of work, and it's been a really successful sort of trial. So we're pretty pleased with the result.
We've got some. So the recommendations are, where does they sit on this one? At the beginning. So you're moving. It's just a moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favour?
The only thing I was going to suggest is, I know we've got priority one, but also through the Chamber of Commerce. I know they're members of the priority one, but I think an approach to Chamber of Commerce specifically through their membership would be good too. You've worded it a lot better. I suggest it was a challenge, but you've worded it slightly differently, more diplomatically.
Invitation felt like inviting.
Yeah.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move on to 10.2, Cameron Road Bus Lane. Page 18. And that's presented by Brendan.
This was my surprise paper, so So what we've put in is we need to formalise the hours of operation of the bus lanes as we start those up on Cameron Road. So currently at this stage, we're anticipating the project will be complete by the end of this calendar year. And so then we can start operating the bus lanes. So we had Oricon do some modelling for us to look at what were the optimal bus lanes when we initially start. And so what I'm talking about here is the initial operation, because there is an agreement under the CIP agreement that these bus lanes become full-time within a 10-year period. And there is some agreed trigger points at which they will move to full-time. So this is only talking about day one when we turn them on, and we're recommending for the first 6 months. So what the modelling tends to highlight is that we have bi-directional traffic. In the morning, the traffic is coming into the CBD. In the afternoon, it's heading out. So what we are recommending is that from 7 till 9 a.m, we operate the bus lanes inbound, and then 4 till 6 p.m. outbound. So what that does from our perspective is it balances the need. It provides those full-time bus lanes, sorry, not full-time, but provides the bus lanes when we've got the significant traffic congestion. It puts reliability back into the network for the buses, but it balances the transition for businesses of parking and availability of parking, because obviously some of those businesses are used to having parking outside. And so there is an adjustment period as we move from initial startup over the next 10 years to full-time bus lanes. So the modelling highlights that if we had the bus lanes operating in both directions, there's no real benefit. The buses don't gain, but there's quite a significant disbenefit for those businesses. So we feel the balance is 7 to 9 inbound, 4 to 6 p.m. outbound, and that aligns with most other cities around New Zealand. So it's consistent with what people would see elsewhere. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Thompson.
2 questions. Firstly, through you, Chair, to Mike. Regional council staff are in agreement?
Yes, short answer.
Thank you.
And we'll watch the operation of it and monitor that. I think the operation of clearways and bus lanes are the tricky part, and then that's all about behaviour change. So I think that's what it comes to.
And my second question is, what are we going to do to mitigate the safety risk?
Could you clarify on safety risk?
So on all of the options, there's safety risk that's been allocated here. So safety risk between cyclists, parked vehicles, as well as conflict between buses and cyclists. So we're obviously turning our mind to how do we mitigate those safety risks. So just some indication of how we might go about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things with Cameron Road is it's a new facility, it's a new type of facility. So we're looking at an education campaign, across all users. So we have to sort of work with cyclists. How do they use it? How do they interact with both pedestrians and traffic? But also it's working with the shopkeepers, the customers, the pedestrians and the drivers as well, because it will be different. And I think that's one of the slight risks of having part-time bus lanes, is that motorists are used to sort of being able to pull into a car park, whereas between 4 and 6 you potentially have a bus coming past. So I think it's around signage, it's around ensuring that we have a really good education campaign and that we have a very good start. So, a lot of advertising around the fact that these are now bus lanes, they are operating, and make them highly visible. I think that's why we're proposing that we don't open them until effectively the whole network is done, so that we don't have this piecemeal, these little bits and pieces as we finish blocks, but we'll come through at the end, do a full mill and mix of the carriageway, mark it all up, and then start operating it.
Arising, if I may, and this again through you, Chair, to Mike. Obviously, there are certain buses that go Cameron Road. So is it possible to put signage on the back of those buses, really alerting all others to the need to be very, very diligent and careful around safety issues?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The short answer again is yes. I think we need to work with TCC around the application of that and efficacy. But a particular, just honing in on Brendan's point around training, our bus drivers are really key in this as well, and their behaviour will dictate a lot of that safety risk manifesting or not. So I think money well spent wise, educating the bus drivers and what they may expect when the lane opens is a huge thing for us. And of course, we can explore other opportunities at the same time.
Yeah, because the other key thing with there is there's a couple of places where we've got what's called a bus jump. It'll be the first time they've been used in Tauranga, so there is a bit of education required on how they will operate and what the bus does at those points.
So that highlights the need for a very good communication strategy, and it will need to be a combined council initiative, I would have thought. Did you consider the time of day that schools get out and the frequency of buses at that sort of 3:15, 3:30? You're not catering for that? I presume you have a reason?
We did look at that because one of the options was a 3 till 6 p.m. Afternoon peak. But when we did the modelling, it tended to indicate general traffic flow meant the buses didn't need that exclusivity of the space. And it is a critical hour of retail trade. So again, it was balancing between a slight advantage for the bus, but quite a significant negative for the retail. So it was just weighing and trying to balance. We thought 4 till 6 probably provided the most benefit for the buses and minimised impact for the businesses just in that transition period.
Yep. Accept your answer. You wanted to speak? Yep.
So just clarifying on the safety, have I read that right when that is actually just looking at the Oricans MCA, that is for the cyclists who will be using the bus lanes. That's the on-road cyclists. And this is the problem we have, where we're providing a two-way cycleway, which is a safe cycleway, and yet we have a different group of cyclists who want to, we call them the lycra cyclists, because they want to ride on the road because they go as fast as the cars. And that's a small group of people. And we've been trying to deal with them in Tauranga Street, and we're having them highlighted again here, where we've gone to a considerable expense of putting in a two-way cycleway. There are still those who want to ride on the road and mix then with big vehicles, whether they're buses or whether they're trucks. So that's the safety issue. They should all be riding on the two-way cycleway. That's the objective, is to get all the cyclists on that. It's safe, it's off the road, it gives those big, heavy vehicles the assurance that they're not having to cope with random cyclists who are travelling at fast speeds. But that's the safety issue. Well, we can't, unfortunately, but it is on the list to give. There's an election later in the year, and we're preparing a list for the incoming Minister of Local Government, and I've asked that be put on the list, that be enabled, because if there is a safe cycleway provided, then all cyclists should be using that. And you know, I have great sympathy for the bus drivers and for the truck drivers who then think that cyclists are going to be off the road and find that they're not. So that's my. That was. So you can't currently. No, we can't. We can't. We'd love to. We would have done it with Tauranga Street. But really, what I wanted to talk about was what we've got in front of us now is. I think we should be putting a master plan in place, because we're seeing this constantly with businesses who, for all the right reasons, have seen Cameron Road as a place where they can set up business and have car parking in front of them. Well, actually, this project is part of a big change that is happening to this city, where Cameron Road is not going to be the major arterial road where businesses set up shop and can expect parking outside their shops. It is moving to a multimodal transport corridor that is pedestrian friendly, that has 15,000 more people living along it and around it, and that major arterial access will have to move to the Takatimu Drive. So we've got a 10-year window. I just looking at the memorandum of understanding, I can't remember whether it was 2021 or is it 2022? It was, where are we with the signatures?
It was 2022.
2022. So by 2032, we have to provide one-way car traffic and one dedicated bus lane each way. Is that right? By 2031.
2 vehicle lanes each direction and 1 bus lane. So effectively the 2 vehicle lanes plus the full-time bus lane.
Or we're not going to be able to fit that down stage 2 with
no, stage 2
cycling.
is different. That's just
right.
in stage 1. Yeah.
Right. So what I think we should be preparing between us, both region and us, because we are partners in this with Whakakotahi, is a 10-year master plan. What's happening? Where is the construction? Where is then we've talked about the special buses and the express services. We're going to be talking about bus shelters. Where does all that fit over that 10 years to get to that dedicated bus lane? So that when we're talking to businesses, as we are constantly at the moment, we're able to say that this is a transition. You are going to be able to have parking outside your business off-peak at the moment, but within 10 years, that won't happen. But we're moving through this process as the construction happens, as the road itself is changed. And that way people get a clear vision of what to expect and when. At the moment, it's pretty up in the air, and I don't think even we have a good understanding of, we've talked about, having these wonderful 20-seater electric buses running up and down. Well, let's put it into the plan. So when you do your long-term plan and we do our long-term plan, we've got that identified as happening in, I don't know, year 3 or year 4 or year 5 or whatever it is. And the public can then see. So we have a plan as to how we're going to move to that 10-year goal of a dedicated bus lane.
Totally agree. It highlights the need for a really good communication plan that again, I think needs to be a city council, regional council initiative to actually communicate better with our public so they understand what we're trying to achieve. Because I don't, as you say, even we struggle at times to understand, and they certainly don't. And I think we need to bring our community with us as we get this first stage finished. So that I would like to see the combined staff coming up with a proposition for a really good communication strategy for public transport.
Well, we need
Yep.
We need the master plan first.
Yep.
And then we put the communication.
Yep.
Then we've got
Let's
something
start.
to communicate.
Yep.
Yeah.
But through
Sorry, I've got
sorry.
Commissioner Selwood first.
Well, look, like you were really just going to endorse the whole proposal. We've failed to date to sell the vision of what we're seeking to achieve, and we need to urgently redress that. And the consequence of that is that we've got a daily battle in the newspaper, it was in there again today, where people who have been quite significantly affected by this are rightly raising their concerns, but because they lack the understanding of what we're seeking to achieve. And certainly if you're a business person along Cameron Road and you're thinking about the future of your business, you need to understand that the world is changing and therefore plan your own business. But if you don't have a clear understanding of that, understandably you get upset when suddenly all of these cones appear outside your business and you can't trade like you once did. So I think, the onus is on us, as Anne has rightly said, to get a proper master plan, start from the end outcome, and then work our way back in terms of sequencing of how we're going to get there, and when the lanes will become dedicated versus peak time, And then, as you say, Chair, communicate that very clearly and loudly that this is the future plan for the development of this corridor for the city. It's a fundamental need.
And we've got less than 6 months to do that, and because that communication has to be out before we actually initiate the go live for Cameron Road Stage 1.
Yeah,
Councillor Thompson.
I totally support the concept of a master plan, because I got very confused between the Stage 1 trigger point for throughways and then Stage 2. So what is actually the plan? And I note there was some confusion, I think, in the wording around the MOU. So if we could clarify that, that would be great. But in saying that, you know, we've got to think about the impact also. If you're putting Takitimu Drive into play, how's that going to connect with the Northern Arterial and its intersection together with 15th Ave and Turret Road, so that people get the full picture about what's going to be happening. So totally support the master plan concept. Good idea.
Just picking up on that, the other thing we have to think about in that plan, because once you start laying it all out, there's Fraser Street as well. What happens to Fraser Street? And the staff know, I've already talked to them about that. But how do we, when people are making the decision at the other end of Cameron Road, whether to go Takitimu or Cameron or from the Mount, which way they're going? So what are we doing at those points as well? So it's a plan that, it has to be a plan that that the public can understand, but it also has to be a plan then that our organisations understand and are working towards. And when we're gone, we've got, if we can get this agreement between our two councils, then it makes it easier when an elected council comes in and it's all been signed off and it's just trucking on through. It doesn't mean you can't change it, because any council can change anything, but it makes it much easier for the partners in that partnership then to truck on through.
I wonder, because we've got Jess in the room, whether we could just have, because it's part of this discussion, the timing for the 15th Avenue fitting into Takitimu.
It's at the end.
Well, I received an email because of my work with the Valley Trust. I've got rat traps along the edge of the road, and I was told it was going to be September, October of 2022, and we're now in 2023. But the person who emailed me about it from NZTA has since left. So, is there any feel for timing that you can help us with, Jess?
Probably don't have that level of detail at hand right now. It's moved around a little bit, but it's, I think, later on. Yeah, let me check rather than guessing, and I can come back to you if you like.
We did ask last year if we could bring it to the beginning of the project rather than the end of the project, because it's our understanding that it is the end of the project, so it's still several years away.
I'll come back and confirm.
Thank you. Okay, so have we finished this discussion? We probably need we've got a recommendation that we receive the report, but do we?
Well, I'm happy to move that we receive the report, but
we want to add.
But I do want to add that we prepare that master plan for achieving the project as per the memorandum of understanding between the three partners. Wakakotai, I don't know where Jess has gone.
Yeah, she's there.
Oh, right. Yeah, that we prepare a master plan to achieve the intention of that partnership.
Yep. So
for Cameron Road.
Have you got the wording?
And related works. Yep.
Mr. Chair, just through you, in particular, TSP is well placed to understand all the dynamic here. And so we can leverage the work that's done in there in order to create a combining document. And we're very comfortable with the MOU approach with triggers. I think it makes organisational clarity very good and long lasting over time. I think that's really important for us to understand. So I'm more than happy to do that and perhaps make sure that TSP is part of that conversation.
Should it be just a 10-year plan, or do we need to put the need for communication, a combined communication?
Well, if we add in a 10-year plan for achieving the project as per the MOU, etc., comma, and related works, and then full stop, and on completion of that, a communication plan between the two organisations be completed. Actually, it's between the partners, the three partners.
Just the partners.
Yeah, between the partners. Be prepared.
Did you want to clarify the related works?
No, I think we just leave it at related works because it will be the beginnings and that's right.
I think that keeping it broad is sensible. That covers it. We can put a full stop at the end. So that's moved by.
I'm happy to.
You're happy to move it, and I think Councillor Thompson, one of each. But it's been moved and seconded. You've seen the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now move into public excluded. We will take a short coffee break, but before we start public excluded. But
I'll move.
You'll move.
The reasons outlined on
Moved and seconded. All in